Hello, everyone, and welcome to my den. It's more tabletop talk with me, the Dapper Bard. Yes, there's been, of course, a bunch of news coming out over the weekend, and it's taken me a while to kind of go through things because having a deeper understanding of the subject is always important when you talk about it. You don't want to just jump to conclusions or rush to judgment. First, let's just talk about the big, huge news. The OGL 1.0A, which I discussed in a previous video, is going to remain as the primary open gaming license for Dungeons & Dragons for the time being. We don't know how long it will last, or if they'll just keep it in perpetuity while doing secondary licenses. It's hard to say right now, but for the time being, that's what we have. Yay! The thing that everyone likes is going to remain in place, as it should have. Now, what about the 1.2? Well, I was going to do a video on that, but they basically had this announcement, so I had to scrap that entire video, finish up another video I was in the middle of working on, and then get to work on this one. Because that's how it works when you're a YouTuber and trying to keep up with news that changes every 5 minutes. I figured before we discarded the 1.2 completely, I'd bring up a couple of my personal feelings about the document. Because yes, I read through the entire thing and had a whole awesome video about it that's in the garbage can right now, as I just said. But here's my major takeaways that were problems I had with the document. The first is that it essentially had a morality clause, that they wanted to prevent hateful, discriminatory, whatever stuff in games. And I have difficulty thinking of a single module that ever contained hateful, discriminatory, whatever, unless it was on the side of the bad guy that we're fighting. So that's a little bit weird that they would bring that out. I think that's just one of those safety shields, like, oh, as long as we say this, we can do whatever we want for the rest of the document. We're protecting you, the player. And it's like, yeah, right. It has a behavioral aspect to the rule, which means if they don't like something you say or do, no more contract. You get out. Your products are now no longer under the OGL, and they are illegal products, and you need to take them off shelves. Because the last thing I want is a mega corporation determining what I can or cannot say. And I'm not even making games yet. It's absurd to think that if they think you're too much competition or you say something bad about Wizards, that they could just, boom, contract gone, you go away. That's a lot of power to give a company, and especially with vague rules about what constitutes hateful, discriminatory, obscene, etc. In addition to that, they had a very vague virtual tabletop rules, and they did have a whole section there explaining why they wanted virtual tabletop rules. The general plan was to make it less video game and more just if you had a board and some pens and paper. I generally think this is fine. I mean, I don't think a virtual tabletop or anyone should be allowed to sell someone else's art or assets or whatever as an NFT. In fact, I don't think NFTs should exist at all. I know, controversial statement there. I'm a person who doesn't like NFTs. Ooh. But also to avoid anything that would allow the virtual tabletop to incorporate animations or actual figurines. And of course, certain things that were already rules to begin with, though as far as I can tell, people seem to skirt that rule quite a bit, which is that virtual tabletops aren't supposed to be able to use art assets from Wizards of the Coast for their tokens and things like that on the board. But I know people who do, and I don't know how you would regulate that. Again, vague rules make things a bit more complicated, and it seems like it was just an excuse to try to cause trouble for the various virtual tabletops so that D&D Beyond could be the main virtual tabletop. Last but not least, there was the clause about how if something similar to your product came out from Wizards, you could not sue them unless you could prove that they legitimately stole it. And similarity does not count as proof. So they literally would have to take your thing word for word, scene for scene, and make it their own. Hypothetically, if you did a story where a city was under siege by a Death Knight and his army of undead and had a specific quest route to go through to eventually find the Death Knight, defeat him, and save the city, yay. And they released something where a Lich and his army of undead took over a city and had a path through the city and a little mini adventures you had to fight through to finally get to the Lich, defeat him, and save the city, yay. You couldn't sue even though you might have both used the same city and you have the same setup, because it's different enough and you can't prove that they weren't working on the same thing while you were. Great. Zero protection for creators. That's always wonderful. There's a bunch of other little minor rules in there, and some of which exist in the 1.0a, and I'm not going to really get into all those things because comparing the two documents is a moot point now that that document is no longer in existence. Or so they say. So now, let's discuss about what this means for Dungeons & Dragons and what exactly the System Resource Document and Creative Commons actually are. Before we get into the System Resource Documents or the Creative Common, let's discuss why Wizards went down this path. Most of this began because of the response to the OGL playtest. OGL 1.2 had a draft document up that people could respond to. In fact, the responses were supposed to be allowed until February 3rd. However, due to the heavy response they got within the first week, it closed down on January 27th. From the responses, a couple points of data have been released. First off, 88% of game developers would not publish under the 1.2 OGL. More than that, 90% of game developers would have to adjust their business in order to work with the OGL 1.2. Essentially, it wouldn't be sustainable for Wizards to run the OGL 1.2 in its current state, because they would lose a lot of secondary revenue. The whole mess of negativity that came from the OGL has pushed Wizards into taking a more extreme path to deal with Dungeons & Dragons. And instead of going under the extreme rules of the OGL 1.1, we now have the extreme other direction by making it part of the Creative Commons. Due to the System Resource Document being in the Creative Commons, game developers can now choose between working under the OGL 1.0a and the Creative Commons license. We'll get into those differences a little later, but first let's take a look at what the SRD actually is. This document includes a lot of information that is the basis of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This includes races, subraces, classes, subclasses, spells, and various other key game mechanics, such as leveling up and treasure collection. Now, game mechanics were already protected because you can't copyright game mechanics. However, how the races function in Dungeons & Dragons, how the classes function in Dungeons & Dragons, the name and effect of certain spells, all those things to an extent could be considered copyright by Wizards of the Coast. Which means if your dwarf is too much like their dwarf, they can sue you. Now, if you have a Creative Commons license, that won't be the case. The key purpose of the System Resource Document was to help developers understand the difference between what was part of the Open Gaming License and what was not. However, now that the entire document has been made part of the Creative Commons, essentially everything is fair game as long as you get the proper license to work with. The Creative Commons is something that I didn't realize existed and has been around for quite some time. It's a non-profit organization that helps protect the use of public materials, especially for non-commercial use. This is an organization that helps support open media and even helps protect works that are in the public domain. The basic version of their license is a non-commercial use license. And that's why you can have organizations like Wikipedia that use things from the Creative Commons in order to not have to worry about using copywritten material in their entries as a way of storing knowledge on the internet. However, there are alternate licenses for the commercial use of various products. There's a whole process on their website for figuring out which one you need and how it works, but that's obviously not the main focus of my video, and I'm sure there are tutorials out there for those of you who would like to work and create something under the Creative Commons. What's more important is that you can understand the difference between the OGL and the CCL. The Open Gaming License is designed for original concepts that are similar to or compatible with Dungeons & Dragons, while the Creative Commons license is using Wizards materials for your own project. In other words, if you wanted to create a game that would have the D&D races and subclasses, but a completely different world of a bunch of other original stuff, that's the Creative Commons. If you wanted to create a module or an expansion of classes and what have you for Dungeons & Dragons, that would be the Open Gaming License. Regardless of which one you choose, copywritten materials such as logos, names, world names, etc., those kind of things are still controlled by Wizards. And if you want to produce something that utilizes those, that will require a completely different contract with Wizards of the Coast, which is one of the reasons why most things say 5th edition compatible or title of the book 5e, because getting all those extra licenses and paying the price for all the logos and what have you is not really worth it in the long run. While it's really great to know that there are options for third-party developers out there, not only do we have the OGL and the Creative Commons license, but we also still have the Dungeon Masters Guild. That's great. But all of this just feels like intense PR on the side of Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast. Don't think of us as money-grubbing monsters. Look at all this stuff here. Here you go, stuff. You like stuff? Yay, we're the good guys. They are not the good guys, not even remotely. For those who don't know, Magic the Gathering has gone through basically the same thing we're going through now. Not only did they continuously raise prices on the cards, they also flooded the market with too many cards and kept providing brand new sets before people could finish collecting or full-on utilize the current set. Not to mention the 30th anniversary set. It came with 60 cards, you couldn't use those cards in tournament, and it was $1,000! $1,000 for non-tournament cards. Yeah, the good guys. Sure. All this feels like a smokescreen or a flashbang to just distract us while they go and plan something else more nefarious. Let's bear in mind that there's still the rumors out there of the nickel and diming people on D&D Beyond. Not only with microtransactions, but also adding in a substantial subscription fee. Those kind of things aren't going to go away anytime soon. If anything, they're just going to find new and different ways to try to nickel and dime everybody. Wizards of the Coast provides a lot of revenue to Hasbro, and they aren't going to let Wizards of the Coast fail right now. What they want is Wizards of the Coast to make more money. Because Magic the Gathering made a lot of money, they want D&D to make a lot of money. And when we get to the actual financial report on February 16th, we're definitely going to be seeing a whole huge money arrow pointing to Wizards saying, these guys are going to make all the monies. And of course, all the boycotting and fighting that we've been doing isn't really going to pay off until the spring reports, which we won't even get until later, much later this year, probably in April. Bottom line is, you can't give up. You got to keep fighting. And that's what we're doing. And by keeping informed, by understanding what's going on and what the various terminology means and what they're giving us and why they're giving it to us are very important in the overall fight for open gaming. Thank you for watching. I hope this has helped you understand the drama going on with Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast. And if you have the chance, please like and subscribe. It really helps small guys like me get our voices out there to everyone else who needs to know what's going on in the world of tabletop. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you at the tavern.